In a Beijing warehouse, workers carefully load wooden crates onto a cargo plane bound for Moscow. The shipping manifest is routine enough. Industrial refrigeration units destined for a Russian company called SMP-138. But something doesn't add up. These particular cooling units travel under armed guard once they reach Russian soil. The receiving company's registered address turns out to be an empty lot. And their final destination is not a food processing plant or warehouse, but IEMZ Kupol, a state-owned weapons manufacturer deep in the Russian heartland. European security officials tracking the shipment noticed other red flags: shell companies, a network of secrecy, and a Chinese firm that didn't exist just months before. The truth behind this mysterious shipment would come to light in the skies over Ukraine. In February 2022, just days before Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine, Vladimir Putin met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing and announced that the partnership between their two nations would have, quote, no limits. Indeed, as the invasion began and Western sanctions hit Russia like a sledgehammer, China stepped in as Moscow's economic lifeline. Trade between the two countries exploded from $147 billion in 2021 to over $240 billion by 2023. China became Russia's largest trading partner, gobbling up discounted Russian oil while flooding Russian markets with everything from cars to smartphones to replace the Western brands that had fled. Nevertheless, when it came to the war itself, Beijing publicly claimed to maintain a position of neutrality, insisting it opposed providing military aid to either side. In October 2022, as international pressure mounted, Chinese drone manufacturer CUAV Technology announced restrictions on supplying products to both Ukraine and Russia, supposedly to prevent their military use. Chinese officials could point to these restrictions whenever Western diplomats pressed them about military support for Russia. Yet behind the scenes, Chinese companies were already finding creative ways around their own supposed limitations. By 2023, something curious was happening. Ukrainian forces began noticing that Russian drones were packed with an unusually high concentration of Chinese-made components. The gap between China's public restrictions and private reality was becoming impossible to ignore. But the full scope of this charade wouldn't become clear until July 2025. That month, Ukrainian intelligence officials examining the wreckage of a recently shot-down Russian drone made a startling discovery. Every single part of the device, designated UAV CBTS 611000, had been manufactured in China. Nearly half of these components came from a single company, CUAV Technology, the very same firm that had publicly announced restrictions on supplying Russia back in October 2022. The irony was breathtaking. The company that claimed to have cut off military supplies to Russia was now the primary supplier for an entirely new generation of Russian attack drones. But this wasn't just one isolated case. Ukrainian intelligence revealed that Russia had contracted to produce more than 6,000 of these drones in 2025 alone, a threefold increase from the 2,000 produced in 2024. By April 2025, over 1,500 had already been delivered to Russian forces, with approximately 500 being deployed against Ukrainian targets every single month. Soon enough, investigators were able to trace mysterious cooling unit shipments back to their source. The L-550E engines, being disguised as refrigeration equipment, were manufactured by Xiamen Limbach Aviation Engine Company, a company that had been sanctioned by both the United States and the European Union in October 2024, specifically for supplying drone components to Russia. When sanctions hit Xiamen Limbach, the operation simply pivoted. A new Chinese firm, called Beijing Shichao International Technology and Trade, emerged to take over the supply chain, using the same fraudulent cooling units labeling scheme to evade detection. The engines were shipped through a network of Russian shell companies, first to SMP-138, then to Libs, and finally to IEMZ Kupol, the state weapons manufacturer, where they were installed in drones destined for Ukrainian skies. European security officials tracking these shipments discovered that major Chinese airlines, including China Southern and Sichuan Airlines, had unknowingly transported these mislabeled military components, believing they were handling legitimate commercial cargo. The deception was complete. From manufacturing to shipping to final assembly, China had created an entire shadow supply chain, designed to circumvent Western sanctions while maintaining plausible deniability. China's brazen sanctions evasion isn't simply about profit, but part of a calculated geopolitical strategy that serves Beijing's broader interests in challenging American global dominance. In July 2025, during a meeting with European Union officials, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi made a remarkably candid admission. According to EU diplomats briefed on the talks, Wang stated that China, quote, can't accept Russia losing its war against Ukraine. China has a vested interest in keeping Russia's war machine operational. The reason was obvious. If that were to happen, it could allow the United States to turn its full attention to confronting China. This strategic calculation helps explain why Chinese support for Russia has only deepened since the invasion began. From Beijing's perspective, every month that Russia remains bogged down in Ukraine is another month that American military resources, diplomatic attention, and alliance-building efforts stay focused on Europe rather than the Indo-Pacific. The drone supply operation fits seamlessly into this strategy. By providing Russia with the technology to maintain its aerial bombardment campaign, China helps ensure this conflict remains a grinding stalemate that continues draining Western resources. For Chinese technology companies, Russia has also become an important testing ground. Chinese contractors took over major energy projects after Western firms withdrew, gaining opportunities to test their equipment in extreme conditions. In the battlefields of Ukraine, Chinese defense manufacturers can have Russian forces field test military technologies in actual combat conditions, data that proves invaluable for China's own military modernization efforts. Meanwhile, China's support helps accelerate the de-dollarization of international trade that Beijing has pursued for over a decade. By conducting nearly 90% of China-Russia trade in yuan and rubles rather than dollars, Beijing chips away at American financial dominance while creating alternative payment systems that could eventually globally challenge Western economic leverage. For all the propaganda about their no-limits partnership, cracks in the China-Russia alliance began appearing almost from the beginning, revealing the transactional nature of their relationship and suggesting it may be more fragile than either side wants to admit. Even as Chinese companies ramped up their support for Russia's war effort, Beijing was hedging its bets. After initial sanctions in 2014, Chinese firms had still invested in Russian energy projects. But since 2022, major Chinese investments in Russia have virtually ceased. Chinese businesses clearly recognize the risks of secondary sanctions and prioritize their access to Western markets over Russian opportunities. The fragility of Chinese support became starkly evident in early 2024 when Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned Beijing about sanctions evasion during a visit to China. Almost immediately, Chinese exports to Russia dropped by 16% in March and continued declining through April. Major Chinese banks, including ICBC, Bank of China, and China CITIC Bank, ceased processing transactions with Russian entities, forcing Moscow to rely on smaller regional Chinese banks to maintain trade flows. Meanwhile, Russian anxieties about their growing dependence were mounting. Despite the massive increase in bilateral trade, Russian complaints about the quality of Chinese goods became persistent. Chinese products developed a reputation in Russia for being affordable but unreliable, a particular concern when those products included critical military components. Russian officials privately worried about their country's transformation into little more than a resource colony for Beijing's industrial ambitions. By June 2025, the depth of Russian suspicions became clear when a leaked internal FSB document revealed Moscow's true feelings about its supposed partner. The memo, drafted by the FSB's Department of Counterintelligence Operations, described China as an active intelligence threat to Russian national security. According to the document, Chinese agencies had been aggressively recruiting Russian officials, scientists, and journalists, particularly those facing financial difficulties, about Russia's military operations in Ukraine, Arctic development projects, and aerospace technologies. The FSB had even launched a counterintelligence program, codenamed Intesa 4, specifically to counter Chinese espionage efforts. Yet Russian officials remained prohibited from publicly naming China as an adversary to avoid damaging the politically vital economic relationship. This operational constraint exposed Russia's uncomfortable reality. Moscow knew China was stealing its secrets, but couldn't afford to confront Beijing directly. The relationship continues because both sides need it, but the underlying dynamics reveal two countries using each other rather than genuine strategic partnership. Russia provides China with discounted resources and serves as a distraction for American attention, while China offers Russia an economic lifeline and technology transfer. Yet both harbor deep suspicions about their partners' true intentions and long-term reliability. Only time will tell how long this marriage of convenience will last.